So now that we've gained a great and detailed understanding of the processes that are involved in making a blastula or a blastocyst into a gastrula, and then from that point engaging in organogenesis in this overall scheme of development, let's take and conclude all this knowledge and wrap it up by speaking about human development explicitly and specifically. So we'll entitle the next flowchart Human Development 1. And here what we're going to be focusing on and what I want you to take a look at is figure 46.15. Now, initially what we want to sort of talk about is, of course, the idea that humans develop in utero. They develop within a uterus, and that's within a mother. And this is through 3 trimesters. So we're going to go through these 3 trimesters and see what's happening. So, of course, the basic place to begin is the first trimester of a pregnancy. That would be between months 1 and 3. So it's between 1 to 3 months after that moment of fertilization. What's happening here? Well, what's happening, of course, are going to be some embryonic changes. Okay? But this is actually of a side note for right now, because we'll talk about these embryonic changes in just one moment in a different flowchart. But what this flowchart is actually devoted to are not just the embryonic changes, but we're actually going to focus on in this flowchart maternal changes. Things that are happening to the mother as a result of this growing embryo, as a result of this developing embryo. What's happening on the mother's end, and we can then talk about what's happening within the actual developing embryo. So let's take a look. First of all, the embryo has been implanted. So we consider it, of course, an implanted embryo. But that's going to have some effects on the mother's overall system and body. The implanted embryo in the endometrium of the mother, in utero, within that thickened structure, actually secretes something very, very common and very in great amount. It's called HCG, which stands for human chorionic gonadotropin. So of course this is coming from the chorion, right? It's coming somehow, some way, it originates from that chorion extra embryonic layer that comes from the developing embryo. And it's a gonadotropin. G for gonadotropin. That means it's going to act on a gonad because it's a tropic hormone that's going to go and act on the gonads, just like something that we've seen before. Just like, let's say, maybe LH, right? This is a structure, this is a hormone that mimics the LH. It mimics LH. And it acts like LH on the female's body. And how does it do this? As a sort of structure that mimics this hormone that's usually present in normal amounts, in order for the corpus luteum that's there, that's maintaining the initial pregnancy, the initial couple of days, let's say after fertilization, that corpus luteum, remember, it disintegrates if there is no reason for it to stay. But right now there's a reason for it to stay. But it can only stay if it gets the right messages to stay. And one of the right messages to stay comes from the embryo that's implanted in the endometrium from HCG. HCG acts as a gonadotropin that mimics LH, goes to the ovaries, causes LH to be sort of recognized by the ovaries. And what is going to happen at the ovaries? The ovaries are then going to result in a maintenance of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will not disintegrate. Why is the corpus luteum not disintegrating? Well, let's just write this down. It prevents disintegration. Why is that? Because HCG caused this or told it to do that. Why? Because HCG is coming from an embryo. You want this embryo to get everything it possibly needs. And right now, in the initial stages of pregnancy, it absolutely needs a corpus luteum. Why is that? The corpus luteum, if we remember, hopefully remember, produces 2 critical hormones for a pregnancy. Estradiol, which is an estrogen, and also the very important pregnancy hormone of progesterone. Lots of progesterone from the corpus luteum. That lots of secretion of progesterone is maintained and continued as a result of HCG being produced by the implanted embryo. Thus, this everything after this moment of HCG being secreted by the embryo, the chorion, it's going to be maternal changes within the mother that are happening. Okay, so that's one of them. Another one to look at is going to be during the first 2 to 4 weeks. During the first 2 to 4 weeks of the pregnancy, the embryo is going to get nutrients. Okay, it needs nutrients. Embryo gets those nutrients, NUTR for nutrients, from the endometrium. But again, the endometrium every month prepares itself for a possible implantation because of its thickening. It thickens, and this thickening will be maintained. How will that thickening be maintained? Because you have this HCG affecting the entire maternal hormone, let's say, cascade, and thus the endometrium will continue to have this maintained thickened state, so much so that the glands that the endometrium also possesses will continue to secrete that nutrient fluid that we've mentioned before as a result of this implanted embryo. So that's another maternal change. This nutrient fluid continues to be secreted so that this developing embryo can develop correctly. And let me just rewrite fluid here. Nutrient fluid. There we go. Much better. Okay, in addition, another maternal change to look at is the trophoblast. What the trophoblast causes, actually. The trophoblast, if you remember, it's the outer layer of the blastocyst. It's actually going to mingle. It mingles and mixes, I like to think of it as, mingles/mixes with a very important structure of a pregnancy. That's the endometrium. The endometrium, combined with this trophoblastic interaction, forms a super important structure. That's going to be called the placenta. It forms the placenta. And let's take a look. This is another maternal change, a structure that forms within the mother. The placenta is going to be the organ of exchange. Because what's going to happen is after a certain point, this embryo will get too big. It will demand too many nutrients. The glands of the endometrium, the thickened nature of the endometrium, will not be able to satisfy the nutrient and overall metabolic needs of this fast-growing embryo. So what's going to happen is you need a placenta to form, and that's what's formed here as an organ of exchange between the mother and the embryo. Mother plus embryo. Now, what is being exchanged? In large quantities, this is going to allow for the efficient and successful exchange of nutrients, of course. Also, an increased demand of oxygen on the embryo, but that's going to be met by the placental transfer of oxygen. Also, the embryo is now going to start producing waste, and it has to be removed, and it's removed through this placental organ of exchange that the mother and embryo have intimately connected to each other. How is this connection happening? Well, the embryo is connected to the mother directly, to the placenta, therefore directly via a structure that we've talked about briefly in this lecture, and now finally coming back to the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord is the connecting structure of the embryo to the placenta, thus of the embryo to the mother, thus of the embryo to all of the exchange material necessary for its developmental success, I should say. And then finally, to conclude, there are some much more general changes that occur throughout the maternal female body as pregnancy is occurring. These are more specific mechanistic changes that are occurring. Other more general changes include the fact that a mucus plug will form, and this is specifically going to be at the cervix. This prevents any other possible moment or possible entry of any other sperm into the female reproductive tract, because right now it's impossible or not necessary for any other sperm to enter, because we're trying to devote all necessary resources to this current pregnancy and a successful development of the uterus, of the embryo that's in the uterus. So that's why we plug it up. We make sure nothing else can enter through this mucus plug at the cervix. In addition, you're going to have placental and uterine growth, as we've sort of highlighted already from these direct effects, more broad effects that we saw here. And then also, more generally speaking, ovulation and also the menstrual cycle are going to cease. They're going to stop. There's no need to do this because you've already done the sort of culmination of both of these things. The purpose of both of these things has been fulfilled. Fertilization, thus pregnancy, and thus you don't need to do these anymore so long as the pregnancy is active. In addition to this, you will notice physically that the breasts will enlarge in the female, And in addition, oftentimes nausea will be associated with this great sort of change that's occurring systemically throughout the mother. So those are our maternal changes of focus, all geared towards making sure this embryo develops successfully. Many of these changes are put into gear very much so during the first trimester. Now we'll begin to look at the embryonic changes that are associated with human development.